Part 2, Red Night. When Eli was 3 years old, he disappeared from his bed. Upon making this discovery, his mother, Frances, ran screaming through the house, out into the yard. "Eli!" she called, the sound a tinny squeak swallowed amongst the billion acres of the earth, the great turning wheel of endless dimensions, the infinite reaches of space. "Oh, my dear God, Eli!" She found Eli's father, John, working the crop, and frantically informed him of their son's disappearance. Eli's parents spent the remainder of the morning searching their property, but found no trace of their son. After a few hours, they called on neighbors to help them search. Soon thereafter, they called the police. As afternoon turned into evening, John overheard some of the officers on a coffee break amidst the day-long search. They spoke in hushed tones about the blood moon of the night before, that rare blood-red tinting caused by a lunar eclipse. They shared the strange calls they'd received over the previous 24 hours. Dogs going berserk and attacking their owners, livestock dropping dead so suddenly that farmers feared poisoning, a multiple homicide, the first one in more than 20 years in Gehenna County, that involved a mother drowning her 3 children, one by one, in a small pond behind their home. John didn't want to hear such things, didn't take stock in some nonsense of a blood moon any more than he did vampires and werewolves. Despite his rejection of such ideas, however, his pulse quickened, and his skin grew cold as he left the officers to their coffee and bizarre conversation. Under a blackened sky, he shut out the voices and continued to search for his only son. It was near midnight, more than 24 hours since the child was last seen, when one of the officers, while relieving himself along a nearby tree line, heard what he swore were the dampened sobs of a child. Led by Eli's parents, a corps of volunteers and 6 officers walked into the trees. Flashlights ignited the dark forest, sent ground critters scurrying for cover, erased shadows. They all heard it now, the unmistakable sound of a child, and John tried to keep Frances quiet as they walked deeper. Her wailing and constant beckoning bordered on a fractured mind, and it wasn't until the sheriff himself took her by the shoulders and whispered frantically into her ear that she quieted to an oft-choked whimper. They found Eli at the bottom of an old well, a forgotten, beaten-down shaft that had been covered with planks, now rotted through. The circle of stone marking its entrance was thick with hosta leaves, ivy, and wild ginger so dense they would have likely never seen it, never been aware of its existence, were it not for the child's complaining cries of hunger and cold. They lowered John by rope, a span of nearly 30 feet, to fish out his boy. Later, John would comment that when he looked up from the bottom of that well, clutching his cold, wailing child to his chest, he was struck at how the faraway moon seemed to look back from the well's opening, a bright white pupil centered within an ink-black eye, and how glad he was to see it pale milk instead of the fiery red from the previous night. Although found inexplicably naked and half sunken into the soft muck at the base of the well's chute, Eli showed no signs of injury or long-term physical complaints. His mother, however, never recovered. Frances grew more anxious and fretful around her baby boy as the weeks passed. There were rumors she'd lost part of her mind, broken by the shock of the odd disappearance, and even odder reappearance of the child. It was whispered she did not believe the child hers, that her boy had been taken away and replaced by another, the very one found in the bottom of the well that dreary night. John did his best to alleviate his wife's paranoid conclusions, but despite his tearful protestations, he was unable to convince her otherwise. Then, early one chilled morning, months after the incident, John woke to find both Frances and Eli gone. Panicked, he searched the home's immediate surroundings, and by the grace of God found them both. She had taken him to the creek. Her full weight was upon his back, his limbs thrashed in the ice-cold water's flow, his face completely submerged. John ran at her, screaming a cry of horror and hate. He struck her head brutally with a clenched fist and pushed her off his child. He scooped the coughing and red-faced boy into his arms and ran for the house. Without hesitation, he called the police. The sheriff found Frances where John had left her, babbling and glassy-eyed with shock beside the creek, her eyes wide and distant with the loss of reason. A purple knob swelled at her brow where her husband had struck her. Frances was hospitalized and heavily medicated, but did not survive the week. It was never discovered how she acquired the rusted razor blade she used to open her wrists and slice the carotid artery in her neck. They found her lying in her bed, the thin mattress heavy with blood, the surrounding linoleum floor a red pool that stretched and channeled into thin branching limbs, of which one had crept under the door leading to the hallway, where it was spotted by a nurse doing rounds. Eli's father never discussed the incident of the well, or his wife's tragic suicide with his son. He told him only that his mother had passed of a sudden illness, and prayed their friends and neighbors would keep his family's dark history to themselves. And so, as a child, Eli never knew different than a fictitious version of his past, and therefore never considered himself to be anything other than the son of a widowed farmer, growing up among crops in the heart of the Midwestern United States. He never considered himself unusual in any way, as anything other than human. Not even when he performed miracles. As Eli grew older, his father often left him in the care of the neighboring foster family, where he was watched over while becoming fast playmates with their youngest daughter, Carrie, who was of the same age. Years later, when Carrie and Eli were in grade school, Mr. Foster suffered a savage heart attack that killed him faster than the swipe of a scythe, leaving both children now semi-orphaned and even more reliant on the other's friendship. Gradually, for no reason either of them could put a clean finger on, Eli became more and more of an outcast. Despite his father's efforts of secrecy, rumors ran rampant about the strange disappearance on the night of the blood moon, and Eli's awkward demeanor and daydreaming manner left him open for attack from kids, gossip from adults. Some thought him a changeling or a demon. Others suggested he was an alien from outer space. Eli and Carrie would often laugh at the rumors, although Carrie knew deep down that they deeply affected her best and closest friend. "What would they call me if they knew the things I could do?" he said one day. And although he said it lightly, Carrie felt a rise of panic in her chest. She clutched at him, stared deep into his eyes. "You mustn't, Eli," she said sternly. "You mustn't ever. Not ever. That's between us, understand? Always." He'd nodded and smiled in his melancholy way. His eyes left hers, found the horizon. "You don't think I'm any of those things, right?" "What, like an alien?" she said, then kissed him quickly on the cheek, smoothed his thick wild hair. "Nah, if anything you're an angel, sent here to protect me." "A guardian angel," he said, brightening. "I like that." She took his hand and pulled him toward home, stepping through the field's high grass toward a dripping red sun. The sweet, powdery smell of grain filled the air. She carefully pulled burdock burrs from her jeans as they went, brushed brown straw from his hair. "That's right, Blue Eyes," she said, "and don't ever forget it."